All right, everybody, welcome back to the Resilient Edge, where we dive deep into the strategy, stories, and skills that help individuals and organizations thrive in the face of adversity. My name's Dave Weiner, and in this podcast, we'll explore resilience in a lot of different ways: safety, security, crisis intervention, leadership, and beyond. In every episode, we strive to bring you expert insights, real world experiences, and actionable takeaways to strengthen your preparedness and response in an unpredictable world. So let's go ahead and sharpen our edge together. I am super jazzed and honored to welcome Sara Correll to this podcast. Sara is very well known out there, but I'm going to give you a little bit about her background for those of you that may not be familiar with some of her work. Sara is the amazing founder of The Power of Our Story, which has become an amazing community for those who protect and serve active duty veterans, first responders, Gold Star families, and everybody who supports those particular communities. Sara has a master's in crisis response and trauma counseling for veterans and first responders, experience as a drug and alcohol counselor, and a deep personal understanding of loss and resilience. Sara has spent years creating spaces where stories can be safely shared without judgment. And another amazing thing, and we're going to also drop a link to this in the chat, but Sara also has a book, Wounds to Wisdom: Healing Through Veterans and First Responders. And I am very fortunate not only to know Sara, but all the amazing authors that contributed to that book. And Sara reminds people of something that's very, very simple, which is most often forgotten, which is that healing begins when we're truly heard. So, Sara, I'm super grateful that you're here, and thank you for being on our podcast today.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to be here. I appreciate you inviting me on.
Absolutely. We'll kind of dive in. I have some things that I think our listeners would be interested in hearing. And one of the things that we've talked about in the past is you said that healing begins when people finally feel safe enough to really share their story. Can you take us back to the beginning or that moment when you realized that storytelling in the community had to be at the center of this work?
Yeah, there were so many little places in my journey that led to that. But the beginning part was basically when I lost my dad to suicide. It changes your life overnight. And things don't fit the same way anymore. And the feeling of safety doesn't feel the same anymore. So I just remember the sense of really feeling like what group of people is safe for me to share this kind of grief and trauma, complicated grief, and who is not. Because you're raw. It's like still trying to figure out like what in the world happened. And then it is that kind of protective feeling like, I don't want to be judged yet. I don't even know what happened. I don't want to deal with anything more than what I have to deal with now. So that was kind of a life-changing moment for me that made me really later on not waste that suffering and be able to use it for people that were suffering like I was in silence. Going forward, I've always believed that kind of fellowship and group and sharing stories is actually spiritual. It's part of I see it as part of a relationship with God. Like it's community, it's sharing, it's the way that we're wired, it's the way that we're created. So I felt like in that time, I reached out to some women that I also had the sense that they were struggling with something too. So we got this group together and just shared our stories and read a book together. And it was powerful to me. It was no judgment, 9 months, just being able to share without the feeling that there's going to be judgment. And then had my kids. I have 4 sons, and my husband and I would have, their football team or whatever sports teams they were on. They would come over every week. We did this for 11 years, and I saw the power of community, having these kids over, feeling like there's a safe place to really, really become a tribe. And you could see the impact even on the field. So that was another thing that really showed me, wow, it is so powerful to build community. And then I went back to school, and this was the biggest one that really fine-tuned this journey of the power of our story. I would happen to be sitting next to a veteran, And I was very intrigued with some things that he said. And I asked him one day, I said, would you be willing to share your story with me? Because I don't understand a lot in the military arena. So we had coffee one day and he shared a story, and I was blown away. I could not believe that the people who protect us on the back end could be suffering so much. It just, it made me really sad. It made me like, I want to do something. I have never been a veteran or a, active duty protector, first responder, never had that, but I understand the feeling of feeling alone in something that you believe other people don't understand. Um, so I invited him and his wife to come over, share a story with our family. And then I said, "Hey, would you like to share your story with like our community? Because they need to hear this. We need to hear what those who protect us are going through and be part of that." This kind of I think this lasted 2 to 3 years. But what was really cool to see is it was just kind of a combined impact. I could see that he was starting to really start fine tuning and identifying and really understanding his own story and being able to articulate it more clearly. I saw him being able to now reintegrate more with civilians. And then I saw civilians like me think, wow, I didn't understand post traumatic stress. I didn't understand any of this. So I feel like it really brought our protectors and civilians to that idea. And so that's where you and I connected, Dave. You and I connected, and you were right there kind of on the end of that particular journey, but ready to start a new journey with first responders. But that's to answer your question, that's really where it all started.
And what you said is very interesting in terms of as you've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of the veteran and first responder community, I would argue that that individual that was willing to answer questions from somebody that they didn't know off the bat or know very well, I think was very much an anomaly in our world because as you know, and I would love your feedback here, we're not ones that willingly just run around sharing our stories out there just for the sake of sharing our stories. And we have a much more reserved presence, especially when it comes to trauma and other things. So I think it was very fortuitous for you. And I appreciate how you approached it because you basically said, look, I don't know much about your community and I would love to hear more. And I think that's a great approach. And I don't know if everybody approaches it that way, but I think that's a great way to approach it.
I definitely wanted to honor and to support and, yeah, walk with, not thinking that I'm coming with, um, not walking in front of, if that makes sense. I really just wanted to be a support and to learn what that looks like for a protector. What does that look like? What does support look like? I had no idea. So the only way to do it is to ask. So,
Yeah.
yeah, how do I support you? Would you be interested in doing this? Because I think a lot of us have no idea.
No, agreed. And my background working at the VA and other places, and I've encountered a lot of brothers and sisters who in their own minds feel, well, I'm the only one. And then when you encounter a group such as the Power of Our Story or other similar groups, you realize, oh, I'm not really the only. And oh, right.
True.
And then it becomes more, I hate using the word normalized, but I think it becomes a little bit normalized in the sense that, okay, I'm not the only one dealing with this right now. Or I may be the only one that dealt with a specific type of trauma, but you realize that there are others around you that also have similar trauma. And, to your point, they benefit from the group in
Yeah.
that aspect,
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
which is kind of a good segue, right? So when we talk about the group, and obviously, when you put a group together like this, and for all our listeners out there, Sarah is very correct. I was there at the very beginning of Power of Our Story, and I was probably one of a handful of first maybe presenters at one of the initial Power of Our Stories. But this leads us into the power of the group. And you really had to kind of define some guidelines in the very beginning about like checking judgment at the door, like,
Mhm.
hey, this isn't a place to judge folks because everybody has, this is our community now. This is our shared space. How does that facilitate the healing environment versus like an individual, like one-on-one peer support type thing? How does the group handle that?
I love the group. First off, there's a lot of data out there that talks about when somebody can come into a group, a supportive group, and they have a place of safety where they can release their stories, they can share their stories. There is actually a holistic effect, a holistic healing that happens mind, body, soul, spirit. They've done studies where they have seen doctors' visits go down. It's just so clear that it's so helpful, so important. And what I found too is I always felt like, as much as I would like to support a protector, one on one, I always felt like there's only so much I can do. And in the addiction counseling, when I did some groups there with some second chance felons and homeless addicts, I loved the power of the group. I myself was not in recovery, so I would lean a lot on the people who relapsed. And so I could just pull them in, and they really were so helpful with teaching the newer people in recovery why certain things are so important. And so I just used all that and wanted to create the group where people really understood how important it is for them to be able to release these stories and to have people really support that. And it's this powerful impact where the person who's actually sharing their story can really feel seen, they can feel supported, they can definitely realize they're not alone. That's a huge thing. That is a huge thing. And what it also does is for the listener, it really helps the listener to start articulating and identifying their own story. Makes them feel safer, like, oh my gosh, me too. Absolutely been through that. And as everybody is talking and sharing, there's all these little insights that start happening. And it also relieves the whole stigma of protectors needing mental health support. Very quickly on our groups, people will start saying, oh, I did EMDR. That actually was really helpful. Oh, I went to, 22 I went to Healing the Heroes. Or, everybody starts talking about these healing modalities that are really helpful. And then it's just not a thing. It's like I always feel like these groups would be perfect for therapists because we can prime people to be ready for if they need something deeper, like deeper wounds that the groups can't really help. I mean, we can support as friends and that sort of thing, but there may be other things that are very deep that just need, there's a place for therapy. But they'll be so used to just being open. They'll be able to identify and articulate the things that are very difficult. So I love the power of what every single group member offers. And you never know. I'm always amazed to this day. I'm always amazed whose story impacts who. You never know. There's not one great storyteller, there's not one person who has the best story. It is so personal. I love seeing what happens.
I think you made some really, really great points. And one of the things, and I'm going to bring up a specific word you said, which was articulate, because I think that's a very, very important word. Because I know personally, I felt this way as a veteran and first responder when dealing with internally. I'm dealing with things, and sometimes in the past, maybe not so much anymore, but in the past, if I've been struggling, I've had a hard time articulating what's actually wrong with me, which makes it a little bit more difficult to share
Right.
because how do I don't even know what to say. I don't even know how I'm feeling or how how I'm doing. So how am I supposed to formulate what's going on with me to somebody else even if I
Right.
don't understand it, right?
That's
And
right.
I think what the group does, or at least what I've seen kind of in real time, especially being on a lot of those calls, is that people learn to share or through the others who have already kind of reached that point of, hey, I can articulate. And sometimes we just don't have the words for what we're feeling or what we encountered, and it's very hard to put those into words and then translate it into something that doesn't facilitate judgment from somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
that's, yeah, I think that's the thing we all want to avoid is I don't want to be judged. So how do I say this in a way that lands so somebody understands, but they don't judge us for it, which is, I think, why a lot of first responders and veterans suffer in silence, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't sometimes, or they may know, what's going on. And I know there's a huge focus on, mental health, PTS, traumatic brain injury, and all of these other things we experience. But I think there's other things that create challenges, like moral injury, shame
Sure.
versus guilt.
Right.
There's a lot
Grief.
of different things out there in regards to that, right?
Yeah. Very much so. And it's the more you can identify what you are struggling with, like what is moral injury? What is grief? What is shame and guilt? And then, like you said, when you hear somebody else's story and being able to vulnerably and courageously share it, it is it really can be the difference between life and death. Because when people can't articulate it, they can't identify it, they start isolating, right? Very common, very understandable. Because in your arena, vulnerability means, okay, I'm either going to get killed or I need to protect somebody else who's vulnerable who's going to get killed, or I need to exploit the enemy's vulnerability. So there's all these scripts and narratives that have to be flipped for this new mission of retirement or transition. And they have, and and you all have to figure out, okay, wait, vulnerability is good. Okay, well, and then go through, well, what am I feeling? If something doesn't feel right, I'm not doing great. But to be able to really then start articulating it, start understanding it, start sharing the freedom that comes from being able to freely share kind of what's going on, and then the friendships that are built that are very authentic is so much different than isolating, and then which can lead to addiction because there's no community, no true connection, then can lead to suicide, hopeless.
So do you think that's what's missing when we don't create these spaces that there's more risk out there?
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, that's why I devote years to this and I want to devote many more years is because I think connection really is the opposite of isolation, addiction, suicide. I mean, of course, there can be more complications, there can be other issues involved, but for so many, that's all they need to start healing, to start then being able to navigate what is the way to freedom, to thriving, to the new mission, whatever that looks like.
And, it's this is a good segue into kind of something else I wanted to bring up and have you share, with our listeners, which is identity and purpose. Those loom large in the lives of veterans and first responders. I know when I transitioned more so from law enforcement than the military, I think that was a challenge, and there were some unique things that I hadn't thought about that now kind of seem more intuitive. But being a first responder or a veteran or active duty, military, all those things, these are some of the few professions, if you will, where you really start to identify with your profession, right?
Yeah.
And you become, that thing. And when you first get into law enforcement or you first join the military, you put on the super suit, and you hope you're going to have a long career. And then nobody really ponders sometimes. And that's a very general statement, but a lot of people don't go into these things with the end in mind and not realizing that those kind of things are going to end. So you mentioned new mission. When people are transitioning out, when they start to take off the super suit, they feel like that's their whole identity going away. So What are your thoughts around folks when they approach retirement or transition? How would you suggest they navigate those situations without feeling like they're losing who they are?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such an important question. So there's a few things that are true, and that is that, especially law enforcement, there's not a very long life after many retire. And it's really important to understand why. Like, why is that? I hear stories all the time that, busy, busy, love the job, and then maybe 2 weeks later, they'll have somebody call. Usually it drops off of any interaction with their tribe, their old tribe. So you don't have your friends anymore. I learned some very interesting things from a therapist who is the head debriefer for law enforcement agency. And she was just saying, that some will come and, like maybe the last year will come to her to say, okay, how can I prepare for retirement? And she always says, oh my gosh, I wish all these men and women would come like their first year. Because what happens even after 30 years of service, when they're not dealing with all the traumas, really do lead to physical problems, issues, heart disease, cancers. So the more again that we release these stories, like what happened over this like huge span with all these traumas, like where do you go to first? Well, she said it always comes up. It's like the first, second, third traumatic event in a career. So you go all the way back to the beginning. And then the thing is how you responded to those events sets the precedence for all the other traumas, which is usually suck it up, buttercup, right? That's what I keep hearing. It's always suck it up. And then more and more problems just to be able to cope with these things start coming up. So I think that is one thing that could be so helpful. Just as you realize, okay, I have not been dealing with traumatic events, go find a therapist that you can always check in with. That would be really smart for you to do for your family, for your well-being, for a longer life. Find a therapist that you can check in with through your whole career. That is huge. I think remembering that, there's a phrase in one of our groups that one guy talks about a lot. He goes, it's not the badge that makes you, it's you that makes the badge. And so you really try to identify and think about those things that why did you become a first responder, a protector, active duty, military? Why did you become these things? What is it that you love about it? Do you like protecting people? And really start getting to know yourself, because as you get to know yourself, you can find a good fit job that uses those great qualities and strengths that you have, that you have a passion for, that gets you up in the morning. I think about too, one thing that can be so helpful for protectors too, that can really help with the transition retirement process, is remembering hobbies. Like, what did you love to do when you were a kid? And maybe finding people outside your work tribe to start building community with around those hobbies, you know, or even things like church can bring your whole family in to a new community, with civilians, so that it's not so horrific when all of a sudden you have no tribe. And then all of a sudden, all these events in your career, all these traumas and maybe traumatic brain injury all comes up at the same time. And you have no tribe, you've got no healing modality, you have no um, issues to deal with. So these are things that can just really help. Definitely, if you can, 2 years out, get support with learning who you are. Waypoint Coaching, the Honor Foundation. There's so many places. Our platform, it really helps you to just start really understanding, okay, who am I? What really gets me out of bed in the morning? How does that fit into civilian jobs? What can I do to start building relationships before I leave, before I separate, before I retire? So, those are kind of long things, but just from all the different arenas I've been in, and I can connect the dots and see the patterns of what so many have struggled with, it always seems to go back to those things.
Yeah, I would agree with all of it. And what's interesting too is, as you know, I do a lot of training for a lot of different organizations. And
Mm.
one in particular organization is, like many out there, are incredibly shorthanded, and which is leaving the folks that are remaining behind or that are operational, that are working, to have to work ungodly amounts of overtime and having to deal with missing lots of events and missing time with their tribe and all kinds of stuff. And I'd love your take here, because I think that we spend a lot of time talking about resilience, and we spend a lot of time talking about wellness. And I see a lot of organizations out there that say, oh, you got to take care of yourself. You got to be well. Well, if you're working back to back doubles and you're doing that 10 times a month, um, I think we need to approach the term wellness maybe a little differently. And because I think a lot of our first responders, veterans, they kind of know what they need to do. Everybody knows to eat right, exercise, and all the traditional things we normally tell people. But if we're not giving them the time,
Oh,
right?
uh,
That's a unique thing, right? Like, we say you should do all of these things, but then we're over here saying, well, we're so shorthanded, we need you to work back to back doubles. My approach has been, when I'm interacting with some of these folks who are sharing this with me, I say, well, do something that brings you joy every day, regardless of what it is, or regardless how small of what it is, right? You have to pick your spots to do that. What are your thoughts about that? Because we're in a new realm of first responder operations. Because again, a lot of agencies are struggling with shortages, whether it's police, fire, EMS, dispatchers, mental health professionals, kind of across the board. So what would be your sage wisdom and advice, Sarah,
ah.
in that aspect?
Well, it's only what comes from all of you and, connecting those dots. Yeah, I think it's really the thing that's hard is for our first responder, if they perceive that the agency really doesn't care about them, I think that adds to more of the concern and fear of, let's see, if I open up about this, if I open about up about this need that I really need to take a little time off, or I really need to go and see a therapist, or, what is going to be the consequence? Do they really care about me? Like, are they going to support that need? Or sadly, there's been a lot that have really struggled with the feeling of betrayal or the feeling or the moral injury, feeling like, man, there's things that they wholeheartedly put their like everything into this agency, and then something will happen where they realize, oh my gosh, they don't feel the same about me. And that is a huge, huge thing. And again, if there's no place to really talk about it, there's consequences to that. So yeah, getting back to your question about really finding joy, finding things outside the agency, really, because it will end at some point. And I think as much as probably people have good intentions of staying connected, it usually doesn't end that way where you have that same tribe. They kind of go on without you because they're still maybe, working at the agency. And now you again are left with feeling like I don't have anything. So, yeah, I think really finding the things that bring joy, the things that hobbies that you love to do. Maybe you loved to go fishing. Maybe you were a bike rider, really finding a new tribe outside of your work to really help with that transition.
Excellent, excellent. Any final thoughts before we wrap up today? Any words of wisdom from Sarah?
Oh my gosh. I just really hope that people who are struggling know that they're not alone. that considering the things that you and I talked about today, I have seen it firsthand, the huge difference of well-being it makes in a person's life. Of course, be wise in who you share your stories with. Sometimes you may just want to do expressive writing. That's a huge thing too. You can write it down, then that helps you gather your thoughts and articulate it. But again, being able to articulate your thoughts and what's happening in a safe environment, being able to build a tribe, it can bring so much inspiration, so many new directions that you may not have been aware of, so many new contacts, so many new ideas. I think it's just building that community, finding a place to do that can really be life-changing. So, I would say that would be something that I hope people take away from this.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and your wisdom today. I know our listeners are profoundly grateful to you for sharing those things, and we appreciate you being on today.
Thanks so much. It's an honor. It's an honor to serve our protectors. So, thanks for having me on, Dave.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, everybody, that is our episode for today. We appreciate you tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Resilient Edge. Take care and stay safe out there.